Good evening. I wanted to talk on an aspect of the presidency of the United States that not very many people are aware of. That aspect is the United States presidential line of succession. To put that in a question, who are all the people that can become the president should a necessity arise? It is easy to assume that should the president die, resign, or is rendered incapable of discharging his duties, um, his official duties, the vice president becomes the president. The first three people in line behind the president are first, the vice president, second, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and third, the President of the Senate. But what if some disaster or some catastrophic event occur and it kills or renders incapable these three people? Who are the other members of government that can become the president? Before I share that list, I want to go over some information regarding the history and what the law states as according to the Constitution of the United States. I wanted to read what the Constitution states regarding the succession line of the presidency of the United States. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6 of the Constitution of the United States reads, in case of the removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the president and vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a president shall be elected. In the case that the president can no longer serve, the vice president would serve as president. If the vice president cannot serve, the line of succession falls to the Speaker of the House, then to the Senate President, and then to cabinet members. Before I read the list of everyone in government in the cabinet that can become president, I want to read a few other information, in particular the 25th Amendment, and other dates in history and other examples of this transformation happening in government. I want to start with the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment allows the Vice President to serve as acting president temporarily in the case that the president is ill or otherwise temporarily unable to fulfill his or her official duties. In 13th of July 1985, Vice President George H. Bush, served served as President of the United States for 8 hours while President Ronald Reagan had surgery. Eight vice presidents have assumed the presidency upon the death of the president, one upon the president's resignation. The president pro the president pro tempore serves as leader of the Senate in the vice president's absence and is usually the senior member of the majority party. The 20th Amendment provides that the vice president-elect becomes president if the president-elect dies before his term starts, but after the electoral college has met. No cabinet member may become president unless he or she is over 35 years old and a United States citizen. I want to share with you a few dates in history that is significant to this law or this transformation process. In 1792, the President Succession Act passes, making the Senate President pro tempore next in line after the Vice President to succeed the President. 1886, Congress changes the law to put cabinet officers next in line after the Vice President. Proponents of the act thought cabinet officers had better experience to serve as President. 1947, President Harry S. Truman signs the Presidential Succession Act of 1947, changing the line of succession to Vice President, then Speaker of the House, then Senate President pro tempore. 2003, Legislation is introduced in the House to reform the line of succession and move the Secretary of Homeland Security from last to eighth behind the Attorney General. 2004. Testimony before House Judiciary Committee by Representative Brad Sherman of California explores reforming the presidential line of succession by removing both the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate, and expanding the list to include the ambassadors to the United Nations and those ambassadors to the four permanent member nations of the United Nations Security Council. March 9, 2006. The United States Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 is signed into law, adding the Secretary of Homeland Security to the line of succession. I want to share a little bit about the vice presidential succession. Section 2 of the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Whenever there is vacancy in the office of the Vice President, the President shall nominate a Vice President who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. If the Vice President is unable to serve, the President nominates a replacement, which must be confirmed by Congress. If something happened to the President before a Vice President's nominee is confirmed, the line of succession of President would fall to the Speaker of the House. There is no timeline on when the President must nominate a replacement. Before the 25th Amendment, there was no procedure for selecting its replacement for the Vice President. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy spurred the movement for the 25th Amendment. 7 Vice Presidents have died in office. George Clinton, who served under both Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Elbridge Gerry, who served under Madison. William R. King, who served under Franklin Pierce. Henry Wilson, who served under Ulysses Grant. Thomas Hendricks, who served under Grover Cleveland. Garrett Hobart, who served under William McKinley. And James Sherman, who served under William Howard Taft. When Harry Truman succeeded Franklin D. Roosevelt as president in 1945, the vice president's office remained vacant for 4 years. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, there was no vice president from November 22, 1963 until Hubert Humphrey's inauguration in January 20, 1965. In July 6, 1965, the 25th Amendment is sent to the states and is finally ratified on February 10, 1967. In 1973, Gerald Ford becomes the first vice president chosen under the 25th Amendment after Vice President Spiro T. Agnew resigns. In 1974, after Richard Nixon resigns and Ford assumes the presidency, Ford nominates Nelson Rockefeller to be vice president. So here are the list of everybody in government or in cabinet who can become the president or who are in line, who in the succession line of the presidency of the United States. So we know that the first 4 are the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the President of the Senate. After the top 4, here are the list of everybody that are in succession or in the line of succession. Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of the Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and Secretary of Homeland Security. I hope that we've all learned something new today. It's a pretty complex issue, and like I said before, not very many people are aware of it. But I think it's important to know and understand how the government has set up this law so that at any time there should always be a president at the helm. And and a vice president um, next to him. Thank you.